They didn't see it coming. They walked into that boardroom thinking they held every card, the money, the lawyers, the years of silence they had used like a weapon. What they didn't know was who was sitting on the other side of that table. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. I was 17 years old, standing in the driveway of the only home I had ever known, holding a single duffel bag. It was November, the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it goes straight through to your bones. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and my father didn't even come to the door. He just sat in his chair in the living room, facing the television, like I was already gone. "You made your choice," my mother said. "Now live with it." The choice she was referring to was a job, not drugs, not a pregnancy, not a crime, a job. I had been accepted into a 2-year business program at the community college in our town of Millhaven, Indiana, and alongside it, I had been offered a part-time position at a small accounting firm downtown Hargrove and Associates. It wasn't glamorous. I would be answering phones, filing documents, making coffee. But Mr. Hargrove, who had known me since I tutored his daughter in math for 2 years, told me he saw something in me. He said if I worked hard and finished my program, he would personally mentor me through the firm. My parents had a different plan. They had arranged, without asking me, for me to marry the son of their closest friends, the Delacroix family. Daniel Delacroix was 24. I was 17. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind, but I didn't love him, and more importantly, I had spent my entire childhood watching my mother shrink herself to fit inside a life someone else had chosen for her. I had promised myself, quietly and fiercely, that I would never do the same. When I told my parents I was turning down Daniel and taking the job instead, my father put down his fork at the dinner table and said, very calmly, "Then you are not our daughter." I thought he was speaking out of anger. I thought by morning, things would soften. They didn't. My mother packed my things while I was in the shower. By the time I came downstairs, the duffel bag was by the front door. I stood in that driveway for a long time after my mother went back inside. I didn't cry. I think I was too shocked to cry. I picked up my bag, walked 2 miles through the cold, and knocked on my aunt's door. My Aunt Ruth was my father's older sister, and the two of them had never been close. She was a retired school teacher, 61 years old, living alone in a small yellow house on Carpenter Street, with a garden she tended like it was her life's work because, she always said, it was. She opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in. I'll put on tea." She never asked me to explain. She made up the spare room, the one she had used for storing her late husband's books, and she moved those boxes herself to make space for me. That night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "You don't owe me a single word about what happened, but whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here, and you are welcome in this house for as long as you need." I cried then. I couldn't help it. Aunt Ruth was not a wealthy woman. She lived on her teacher's pension and a small amount of savings. But she was one of those people who made you feel, in her presence, like there was enough of everything. Enough warmth, enough time, enough belief. She came to every single one of my community college presentations. She proofread my papers at the kitchen table, marking grammar errors in red pen the same way she had marked her students' work for 30 years. When I got my first paycheck from Hargrove and Associates, a check for a little over $200, she framed the stub. "I want you to remember this," she said. "This is where it started. I worked at the firm through my entire 2-year program. Mr. Hargrove was true to his word. He was patient and exacting, and he did not let me get away with sloppy thinking. He would hand back my analyses covered in notes and say, 'You're close. Now go deeper.' I frustrated him sometimes. I know I did. But he never once made me feel small. When I graduated magna cum laude, holding the diploma with both hands because I was afraid if I held it with one, it might disappear, Aunt Ruth was in the front row wearing a yellow dress that matched her house. She stood up before anyone else did. I want to be clear about something. I did not think about my parents much during those years. That might sound cold, but it is the truth. I had made a decision to survive, and surviving took up every corner of my mind. I had a roof over my head because someone loved me. I had a future because someone believed in me. I could not afford to spend energy looking backward. After my associate's degree, I transferred to Indiana University on a partial scholarship. I finished my bachelor's in finance in 3 years, working part-time the entire time, and then I went straight into an MBA program. Aunt Ruth called me every Sunday night without fail. We talked about her garden, about the family history she was slowly writing down in a notebook, about the books she was reading. We talked about everything except my parents. There was an unspoken agreement between us that that particular door would stay closed unless I chose to open it. Mr. Hargrove offered me a full-time position as a junior analyst the month I finished my MBA. I took it. Over the next several years, I learned the business the way you learn a language, by living inside it, not just the words but the rhythm, the idioms, the pauses that mean something. I worked long hours. I made mistakes. I learned from them. I built a reputation for being thorough, careful, and honest. By 30, I was a senior analyst. By 32, the firm had expanded, and I was leading a team. By 34, Mr. Hargrove called me into his office, sat me down, and slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was a partnership offer. My name on the letterhead. My name on the door. I sat with that paper in my hands for a moment before I said anything. Mr. Hargrove watched me with the particular patience of someone who has known you a long time. I used to think, I finally said, that I had to prove something. I know, he said. I don't feel that way anymore. I know that too, he said. That's why you're ready. I called Aunt Ruth that evening to tell her. She was quiet for a moment after I told her, the way she got quiet when something moved her deeply. Then she said, "Your uncle would have loved to see this. I love seeing this." Her voice was steadier than mine. She was 69 by then. Over the past year I had noticed, during my visits, that she moved a little more slowly. The garden was slightly less tended than it used to be. She waved off any concern I expressed, the way people of that generation do, as if acknowledging difficulty is its own kind of defeat. But she also, over those months, began talking more about the past, about her late husband, about her childhood, about my father carefully, without blame, the way you might describe a stranger you once knew. One Sunday she told me, "Your father was always afraid of getting things wrong, of looking weak. Fear dressed up as pride is the most dangerous thing in a family, because it looks like strength from the outside." I didn't respond. I just listened. "I want you to understand," she said, "that what they did to you was wrong. Not complicated wrong, not understandable wrong, just wrong. And I also want you to understand that I believe, somewhere in them, there is grief about it. Not enough to have acted differently, but grief nonetheless." I thought about that for a long time afterward. Aunt Ruth passed away 14 months after I made partner. She went quietly in her sleep, which was, everyone agreed, exactly the way she would have chosen to go. She left behind her yellow house, her garden, her late husband's books, a notebook full of family history, and everything she had saved over a lifetime of careful, modest living. Her estate was managed by a local attorney, and when he read the will, I sat across the desk from him feeling something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anything else I had a name for. She left everything to me: the house, the savings, a small investment account she had been quietly building for 20 years. In total, just under $1.4 million. At the bottom of the will there was a handwritten note, the kind her attorney told me she had insisted be included verbatim. It said, "You gave me something to tend to. Every garden needs a reason to grow." I sat with that piece of paper in my hands the same way I had sat with the partnership offer, but this time I cried. I cried for a long time, and I did not try to stop. I kept the yellow house. I rented it to a young teacher who reminded me, in her precise and careful way, a little of Aunt Ruth. I kept the garden maintained. I hired someone to tend it properly, because that felt important. I went back to my life, my work, my team, my name on the door. For about 8 months, everything was quiet. Then one morning, I arrived at the office to find a certified letter on my desk. My assistant had signed for it. It had the name of a law firm in the return address, Caldwell and Marsh, out of Indianapolis. I opened it at my desk with my coffee still in my hand, and I read it twice before I fully understood what I was reading. My parents were contesting Aunt Ruth's will. Their claim, as laid out in 4 pages of careful legal language, was that Aunt Ruth had been unduly influenced in the drafting of her estate documents, that her relationship with me, a relationship they characterized as dependent and manipulative, had compromised her capacity to make free and independent decisions. They were seeking to have the will invalidated. They were seeking, specifically, to claim a share of the estate as her surviving family members through my father, her brother. I put the letter down on my desk. I picked up my coffee. I looked out the window at the Indianapolis skyline for a long time. I thought about the night Aunt Ruth opened her door in her bathrobe and made me tea without asking a single question. I thought about the red pen she used on my papers. I thought about the framed paycheck stub she kept on her bookshelf until the day she died. I thought about her voice on the phone every Sunday. I thought about the words at the bottom of her will, and then I thought about my parents, and the cold driveway, and my mother's crossed arms, and my father facing the television. I set down my coffee. I picked up my phone. I called our firm's legal counsel and I said, very calmly, I need a referral to the best estate litigation attorney in Indiana. Her name was Patricia Voss. She was 60 years old, had argued cases at every level of the Indiana court system, and had, as she told me in our first meeting, exactly 0 patience for bad faith inheritance challenges. She reviewed the documents, asked me a series of precise questions, and then leaned back in her chair and said, "This case has no merit. The will was properly drafted, witnessed, and notarized. Your aunt was in full cognitive health when she signed it. Her physician will confirm that. The claim of undue influence requires them to prove that your relationship with her was coercive. Given what you've described, what they will actually prove is that she loved you, and that you showed up for her. Those are not the same thing. Can they drag it out?" I asked. "They can try," she said, "but I will make it expensive for them to do so." The discovery process was, in many ways, the strangest part of all of this. For the first time in 17 years, my parents' lives became technically visible to me through documents and depositions. I learned things I hadn't known and hadn't thought to wonder about. They had moved from Mill Haven to a suburb of Indianapolis 8 years earlier. My father had retired. They were not in financial difficulty, exactly, but they were not comfortable either. The Delacroix family, it turned out, had moved away years ago. Daniel had married someone else and moved to Ohio. I learned, through deposition, that my parents had known for at least 3 years that I was a partner at Hargrove and Associates. Someone in Millhaven had told someone who had told them. They had not reached out. Patricia presented this information to me as evidence. I read it as something else, as a small, quiet confirmation of something I had suspected but never let myself fully examine. They had known how things turned out for me. They had chosen, for 3 more years, to say nothing. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February at an office building in downtown Indianapolis. I arrived early, as I always do. Patricia was already there. We went over our materials one final time. The settlement we were prepared to offer was nothing. We were prepared to offer exactly nothing, because the claim had no legal foundation and we both knew it. My parents arrived with their attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, the senior partner of the firm that had sent the original letter. He was polished and confident in the way of someone who wins more often than he loses. He shook Patricia's hand. He introduced himself to me with the particular careful courtesy of someone who has done his homework. "Miss Caldwell," he said, extending his hand. He used my professional name, my mother's maiden name, which I had taken when I left home at 17 and kept ever since. "Mr. Marsh," I said. My parents were standing slightly behind him. My mother looked older than I had expected. I hadn't seen her in 17 years and time had moved through her in ways I wasn't prepared for. My father was thinner. He did not make eye contact with me when I looked at him. We sat down at the conference table. "Mr. Marsh opened by outlining their position, his voice measured and professional. Patricia sat beside me with her hands folded on the table. I sat very still, and then something happened that I have thought about many times since. Mr. Marsh paused mid-sentence. He was looking at something on the documents in front of him, our response filing, which included my full professional biography as relevant background for the estate dispute. His expression shifted. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible. But Patricia caught it too, because I saw her glance at me from the corner of her eye. He knew. He had gotten to a page he should have found weeks ago, and he understood something he clearly had not registered before. He recovered quickly. To his credit, he was a professional, but the adjustment was there in the way he reframed the next few sentences, in the way he looked at his clients for just a half-second too long, in the way the confidence in his voice changed its register by a fraction. Because what he had found, in plain language on that biography page, was that I was not only a partner at Hargrove and Associates. For the past 2 years, I had also been serving as an appointed arbitrator for the Indiana Commercial Court. My name was on the court's official roster. It was publicly available information that, somehow, either he had not found or had not fully processed until this moment. In Indiana's legal and business community, that name carries weight, not courtroom judge weight. But weight nonetheless, the kind that means your opposing counsel knows you have argued cases, reviewed filings, and worked alongside the judiciary for years. The kind that means the judge who might hear this case has probably seen my name on a docket. The kind that means filing a bad faith claim against me was never going to be the quiet, extractive exercise they had imagined. Mr. Marsh said, professionally and without inflection, "Miss Caldwell, I apologize. I want to make sure I have your full title correct for the record." He looked at the document. He looked at me. Arbitrator Caldwell. The room was very quiet. My parents were looking at the table. Patricia cleared her throat softly. She did it the way you clear your throat when you are trying not to smile. "That's correct," I said. The mediation was brief after that. Mr. Marsh requested a short recess, which we granted. He spoke privately with my parents for about 12 minutes. When they returned to the table, the terms were straightforward. They were withdrawing the challenge. In exchange, we agreed not to pursue sanctions for the filing, which Patricia had advised me we could reasonably seek, given the bad faith nature of the claim. I agreed to that condition not because I had to, but because I had decided, somewhere in the weeks leading up to this day, that I did not want to spend any more of my life in pursuit of damage. We signed the relevant documents. Patricia shook hands with Mr. Marsh. I gathered my materials. My parents stood near the door, not quite leaving and not quite staying. My mother looked at me. For the first time in 17 years, my mother looked directly at me. Her eyes were the same as I remembered, pale gray, the color of winter light. She opened her mouth, and then closed it, and then said, very quietly, "You look well." I looked at her for a long moment. "I am," I said. My father had moved to stand slightly beside her by then. He was looking at the floor. He said nothing, but he lifted his hand just barely, a gesture that was almost a wave, and then let it drop. I nodded once, and then I picked up my bag and walked out. Patricia walked with me to the elevator. We didn't speak until the doors closed. Then she said, "For what it's worth, you handled that with more grace than most people would have." "I had a good teacher," I said. She looked at me. "The aunt?" "Yes." The elevator opened. We walked out into the February cold together. I had a 2:00 meeting back at the office. Patricia had a deposition in an hour. We shook hands on the sidewalk and went our separate ways. 3 weeks later, I received a letter not from an attorney, not certified, just a regular envelope with my parents' return address. My mother's handwriting. I held it for a long time before I opened it. The letter was 2 pages. I am not going to recount all of it here, because some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will say that it said what I think some part of me had, against all reasonable expectation, spent 17 years waiting to hear. It said, "We were wrong. Not just wrong in a complicated way, just wrong." Those were her exact words. I recognized them, and I think she knew I would because those were the exact words Aunt Ruth had used all those years ago, sitting at the kitchen table, talking about fear dressed up as pride. I think Aunt Ruth had talked to my mother, quietly, over the years, in ways I never knew about. I think she planted something, the way she planted everything patiently, without guarantee, trusting that the ground was not beyond repair. I did not call my parents, not that week, and not for several weeks after. I needed time with that letter. I needed to sit with it the way I sit with any important document carefully, without rushing toward a conclusion. Eventually, I called. My mother answered on the second ring. We talked for 45 minutes. It was awkward in places and careful in others, and once, briefly, I had to put my hand over my mouth because I was crying, and I didn't want her to hear. We did not fix 17 years in a single phone call. You cannot do that. What we did was something smaller and, I think, more honest. We agreed to try. My father got on the phone at the end. He said very little. But he said, "I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago." I didn't tell him it was okay. It wasn't, entirely, and I don't think either of us needed the pretense. But I told him I heard him, And I meant it. I go to the yellow house sometimes on weekends. I sit in the garden. The teacher who rents the house is as careful with it as Aunt Ruth was, and I think about the night a 61-year-old woman opened her door in her bathrobe and made tea for a 17-year-old with a duffel bag and no plan. I think about the framed paycheck stub. I think about the red pen. I think about Sunday phone calls and the notebook full of family history, which I have now, and which I have read 3 times. I think about what she wrote at the bottom of her will. You gave me something to tend to. Every garden needs a reason to grow. I used to think she meant that I was the reason, the project, the thing she had cultivated. I understand it differently now. She wasn't saying I was the garden. She was saying we both were 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and grew, together, toward something neither of us could have reached alone. I keep a photo of her on my desk at the office. It's from the day I graduated. Her standing in the front row in that yellow dress, already on her feet before anyone else, her face doing the thing it did when she was too moved for composure, that particular combination of joy and certainty that made you feel, when she looked at you that way, like your whole life had been quietly witnessed. I look at it on the hard days. On the good days too. I look at it, and I think, she saw me. That was enough. That has always been enough.